Hello, welcome back to the latest episode of You Are My Boro with myself, Dom Shaw of the Northern Echo. My tour of the BBC Tees studio continues. It was Mark Drury last week. It's Rob Law this week. Your debut, Rob. How does it feel?
I'd like to thank all the people who got me here.
Career
As you can
highlight.
see, we've rolled out the red carpet because you are in what is known as the BBC Radio Tees dungeon. So if I'll show you behind the curtain, everyone. So if I turn, you can see it's not as glamorous as it looks. This is just all loads of rubbish that is yet to be thrown out. My bosses will thank me for showing you all that. But feels good. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it, mate.
I'm definitely not going to turn the camera here because I'm in the process. I was saying to you before, I'm in the process of moving what was my office into the nursery. Clearly, more important matters.
Of course, yeah.
So the bed is covered in baby wipes and contraptions that we obviously used when Ezra was a baby, and now we're gonna need again in the next couple of months, which you know all about, obviously, because your second came a few months ahead of mine. You were at Bolton last night, Rob.
Yes.
We'll have a chat about that. We'll obviously talk transfers a couple of days until the deadline on Friday night, and just about Boro in general as we approach the first international break. It felt like a big win last night, and I know clearly Cup isn't a priority for Boro this season, and we know that. We have that conversation every year. But given the slow start, it felt like a big win that will hopefully act as something of a springboard.
Yeah, hopefully. And look, Cup games at this point in the season can be a gateway, can't they? For teams like Middlesbrough, who are going through a spell like they've been going through, which is, without a win in the league, Michael Carrick's kind of been holding it together in front of the press and not putting too much pressure on his team, but he will have wanted a better start, I'm sure, than what they've got. And the League Cup allows to build momentum, doesn't it? If you can get the results. And it was a tricky one last night because I was there and doing the research before the game and just looking at Bolton and where they were at. They had a few injuries and stuff which hampered them a little bit, but I mean they've been flying. They're amongst the favourites to get promoted from League One. They had a really heavy defeat against Wigan, then a draw at the weekend against Burton Albion, and a few fans already sort of getting on the back of Ian Evatt saying, "Oh, we should be getting past teams like Burton Albion and doing this and doing that," and expectation really high there. So I did think it would be a really tricky tie, and it wouldn't be as easy as, well, Middlesbrough Championship and Bolton a League One, and the maths sorts it out for itself. And yeah, first half wasn't great, was it? Wasn't the biggest spectacle you'll ever see. But second half, whatever Michael Carrick said at halftime really had an impact. And it was just wave after wave in that second half of red and white attack. Obviously attacking the goal where there was nigh on 3,000 travelling Boro fans who were brilliant throughout the whole night. And those scenes at the end with the two quick-fire goals to avoid a penalty shootout, if you're going to win it anyway, any which way, to do it like that in front of the travelling support, always, I'm sure, always goes down well. But yeah, it could have been a tricky tie. In the end, it wasn't. Helps Boro build a bit of momentum going into QPR on Saturday, really.
Yeah, it did feel in that second half, didn't it? Where it was attack versus defence, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Bolton tired quite quickly, but it began to have that feeling of it's not going to be Boro's night, didn't it? Credit Riley McGree and Morgan Rogers making the changes. McGree especially then, because he was left out for a couple of games. He came in against West Brom on Saturday. It wasn't great. Boro struggled a little bit. It was only after the changes, really, in the second half when Isaiah Jones and Marcus Forss were introduced that Boro improved. But he made an impact from the bench last night, clearly, didn't he? An assist and a goal, or a goal and an assist. What have you made of McGree's situation? And do you think on the back of that last night, he'll be back in the team on Saturday?
Yeah, the situation's a funny one, isn't it? Because I know Riley McGree, for some fans, he's a bit of a Marmite character. So some love him and think he's the best thing since sliced bread, and others not so much. And I think there's probably more in one camp than in the other. But there is a clear split there, I think, in supporters between what they think of him. For me, I look, if I was a football manager, which clearly I'm not, he'd be in the team every week. I just think when he's there, Boro tick, and he does so many things well. And I just felt like last night, and I don't know about you, Don, but it's that to me seemed like a performance from a player who wanted to prove a bit of a point. You're right in what you say. He's been in and out of the team. He's been coming off the bench. And he wants to play football, doesn't he? A player like him who was playing against Lionel Messi in the World Cup not too long ago, he doesn't want to be sat on the bench. He wants to be in the thick of it and getting amongst it. And last night, I thought the changes that Michael Carrick made when McGree came on had exactly that impact. His goal was brilliant. I mean, bit of individual brilliance and skill there to take the shot on from 20 yards out, curl it around the keeper into the far post, and then to set up Morgan Rogers. So, I did fear at the weekend when he started, and obviously the result going the way it did. I thought, I wonder if he will have to really fight for his place even more now off the back of that. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of Boro players who had a good game against West Brom, were they? So, he was lumped in with the rest of them in that regard. But yeah, for me, Riley McGree can be the difference maker, as he proved last night with the goal and with an assist. And hopefully now that will see him kick on again and sort of cement his place. I think Saturday against QPR could be a big game for him if he starts.
Well, I was going to say it's an interesting one now, isn't it? Because I thought that Isaiah Jones was probably Boro's best player of the starters last night until the changes obviously made a difference. And it worked on the left. He played on the left, and Carrick talked afterwards about how he hasn't played in that role for him. But he put him out there because obviously Marcus Forss was on the right side. And although Jones's final ball wasn't always on point, I thought he looked Boro's brightest, Boro's liveliest throughout. He was dangerous cutting in. And Carrick did make a point in his interviews of saying that both to the broadcast to the BBC afterwards and to the written press. So that does give him a decision to make. McGree can play on the right and cut in from the right-hand side. We've seen that. It maybe gives Boro a different dynamic. If you've got two players cutting in, you can easily swap them over at any stage. And last season and this season, Carrick likes that front three behind the striker to be fluid, doesn't he? So there are options there. Lucas Engel at left back. I think he's had a bit of a tough start, Engel. He was thrust straight into it. And I thought he struggled in the first half at Bolton on Tuesday night. But second half, he grew into it. He got forward. He had more of an impact. And he made a brilliant interception when Bolton, against the run of play, had that chance in 10 minutes from time. So hopefully, we've talked a lot about how Latte Lath has made an encouraging start. Hopefully Engel can build on that as well.
Yeah, and just going back to the Isaiah Jones thing, I mean, you're right. I thought in terms of a player who is direct, can pull your team up the pitch, he gives Middlesbrough that in spades, doesn't he? And he did that a few times, specifically in the second half last night, just getting it and running. And it's a well-worn path, but defenders hate pace against them, don't they? And that directness, and that's what he offers. Riley McGree different in that sense that, not the fastest, certainly not as fast as Isaiah Jones, but just has that little bit of something where he can set them up, he can score them and do it himself as well. Isaiah Jones, I think we all know his quality. I'm a big fan of Isaiah Jones for all sorts of reasons. But yeah, just last night, I think that final ball was just the thing where hopefully he can develop that and have a bigger impact in that regard, as we've seen him do in the past. Do you know what I mean? That he's had a huge impact in the past with his balls into the box and whatnot. So just didn't quite work for him last night, and Riley McGree seemed to work that well. As for Lucas Engel, yeah, it's with new signings, you never know how they're going to really settle in and adapt, and especially, I guess that's the calculated risk that Middlesbrough will have taken with Lucas Engel, which is a player who the stats say he'll get you goals, he'll get you assists, 30 goals in 180 appearances, I think it was, for a left back, which is just, I remember saying to Michael Carrick, there's some strikers who would probably like that hit rate. If he can adapt well to the Championship, I think he could be a decent replacement after losing, of course, Ryan Giles and all the assists and whatnot that he brought last season. I just think and the same with perhaps a few of the other signings, there's just going to need to be a little bit of patience. And in football, there often isn't a lot of that, is there? But there's certainly signs last night that there's something there, and you could see why Middlesbrough brought him to the club in the first place.
And I do think it's worth stressing. Michael Carrick strikes me as the type of head coach who, in an ideal world, he'd get a player in and give him a couple of weeks to find the feet, to get the grips with what they want. Especially, I think, we saw last year that fullback is a key position for Michael Carrick, a key position. So Lucas Engel was in. Would he sign on the Tuesday, the Wednesday? I was off that week, straight into the team on the Saturday, which clearly highlighted Boro's need to strengthen in that area. But then Carrick said last night that Hayden Coulson's also had a bit of a thigh problem, which is why he's missed the last couple of squads. But he's had to learn on the job. And I think for Engel, for Latte Lath, for whoever else who joins between now and
Rodgers as well, you could say, probably. Yeah. He's had to learn on the job as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I think this coming international break is going to be really beneficial. Just a couple of weeks to take stock, to get to grips with a few things. The same will be said for whoever comes in between now and Friday night as well, which we'll talk about shortly. Yeah. But it feels, obviously, you want to go into that break with a win against QPR, but then it feels like this break, I think, is coming at the right time.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Michael Carrick, we've all seen the videos when he first joined, didn't we, of him in the thick of it on the training ground, talking to his midfielders and all those sorts of things, what to do, what to expect, sort of passing on his experience in that regard. Because you get some managers who manage and some who coach. And Michael Carrick seems to me is very much a manager who wants to do both of those. He'll manage the players, but he'll be involved in the training ground as well. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It was more through need, wasn't it? The fact that Latte Lath and Lucas Engel were thrown straight in, for want of a better phrase, and done so. I think Michael Carrick said they maybe had one training session and a half that week when they came in ahead of the game on the Saturday. So yeah, I think those are the two signings who will come good. And Latte Lath, I like what I've seen from him. I don't know your thoughts, Dom, but I think he looks lively, doesn't he? He's obviously got pace, which we said about Isaiah Jones, scares defenders. And hopefully once they get that connection and on the same page and sort of a better understanding of each other, that forward three with Latte Lath then in front, hopefully we start to see a little bit more quality in that final third from him, because I think at times that's what was lacking last night, was that killer instinct in front of goal that would maybe have got Boro home and hosed a little bit sooner than they did. But yeah, I think there's certainly sort of green shoots, isn't there from Lath and from Lucas Engel. And you're right, that time on the training ground during the international break, I think will be huge for getting them bedded in and settled in. And not saying that they're not already. I mean, I asked Michael Carrick about Latte Lath in particular, and he was saying, he's a great character around the place, really bubbly, lights up the room, and he's really likable character. So clearly these players are settling in well because of the atmosphere and the togetherness that Carrick is building at Rockcliffe and in his squad more deeply.
How will that squad look on Saturday morning then? It's Wednesday, early Wednesday afternoon when we're recording this pod, whether you're watching or listening. The deadline's obviously Friday night. We asked Carrick on Tuesday night after the game kind of what he expects, what he's hoping for, and although we know by now that Carrick doesn't like to give a lot away on transfers, he's not going to do what Tony Mowbray does up the road at Sunderland, for example, and kind of go into great detail about the state of deals and where things stand. But he made clear, as we know, that Boro is still looking to strengthen the squad between now and Friday. It's interesting because there's clearly a balance Boro looking to strike. He talked about how you have to be prepared for the unexpected in the final days of the window. Things come up that you might not necessarily expect to come up. And yet, at the same time, the terms he used were, we won't panic, we can't be rash, we have to stick to the plan, and we will stick to the plan. He said, and it's a phrase he's used throughout the summer on a number of occasions, we know how we want the squad to look. He said, we think we know how the last few days are going to play out. This is a manic time, and yet Carrick, as ever, still seems extremely calm.
Yeah, and calm is always the word to use to describe Michael Carrick, isn't it? He never looks flustered or phased by things. And yeah, look, we've seen, haven't we, in the last 18 months, maybe more. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a very clear change in transfer strategy since Kieran Scott's come in, with this ethos now of buying these young, hungry prospects who, from around Europe, who can come in, make an impact, and then maybe in time Middlesbrough move on for a quite a hefty fee. And yeah, in doing so, I mentioned it earlier, but it's a calculated risk at times, isn't it? Because you never quite know what you're going to get. And sometimes prospects can go one of two ways. It can be great. They might start really well and then fizzle out. They might start really poorly and then build up to something. And they need help along the way. You're not buying a ready-made player who is going to come in and guarantee you that 29 goals a la Chuba Akpom, But Michael Carrick, I remember this was aimed at him in his press conference a couple of weeks back. And somebody said, yeah, the signings you've got, though, there's nobody there to guarantee you goals. And it was a really, I thought, again, calm and measured response from Michael Carrick. And he says, yeah, but you might have said that last season. Nobody would have guessed that Chuba Akpom would go on and score 29 goals in a season. So the similarities, I suppose, in that sense, can be drawn that, whether it's going to be Latte Lath, whether it's going to be Morgan Rogers, whether it's going to be Riley McGree, I think what they're expecting this season is rather than having one clear talisman who bangs you the goals, it's more about spreading those goals out. And Carrick related back to his experience at Manchester United, which he very rarely does. I don't know if you've noticed this, Don, but he's very almost reluctant to mention, isn't he? His time as a player. It's all about the here and now. It's all about his players.
He has to be prompted and asked directly.
Yes,
normally,
yeah. You have to physically say and go to him and say your experience as a player, your experiences in this situation, and then he'll talk about it. But he'll never really offer it up, which I think is a mark of the man. But he was asked about times and when Ronaldo left Manchester United, and he said, "Well, look, you're never going to go and find another Ronaldo easily. So for Manchester United in that time, it was about making sure they brought in 2 or 3 other players who they knew would be steady, chip away with the goals, and they could replace him in that sense. You're not replacing him like for like, but you're replacing him in a different way. And I think that's what Middlesbrough are trying to do this summer. And just to bring it back full circle, yeah, it's really going to be interesting to see. I'm fascinated to see how they see out this window now, because I would be surprised if there isn't incomings between now and the closure of the window. Even if I'd be probably surprised as well if there wasn't an outgoing or two. I know Carrick said he wasn't expecting any, wasn't planning for any, but you said it, Dom. This point in the window is bonkers, isn't it? You just never know what's going to happen. Things can come out of a complete left field that you weren't expecting. A player might become available, something might happen, and all of a sudden, Middlesbrough, you look at it in the cold light of day after the window's closed, and you go, "Yeah, well, given who they got, if there are extra signings coming in, might end up being a really good window." But I do think they're just lacking that experience. That's what they need, and I think Boro fans would agree. Listening to this, probably screaming out all window. Just need some experience now. So need some real championship experience, some level-headedness to try and just pad out that squad in the sense of a team that can really compete and have experience in those big moments in what you hope will be a playoff push, a promotion push campaign.
Yeah, you mentioned there about potential exits. Josh Coburn, we know Carrick made no secret, really. He danced around the subject a little bit, but as the summer's gone on, it's become increasingly clear, really, that in an ideal world, they'd like Coburn to go out on loan again. If Boro can get a signing in, a striker in, then Coburn looks set to join Plymouth on loan for the year, which we'll talk about on here if and when that goes through. I think that'd be a good next natural step for Coburn. We know how highly Boro think of him. He signed a long-term deal recently. He impressed at Bristol Rovers last year. Second half of the season was a bit more tricky when he was nursing. I think it was a bit of a knee injury, but it's a logical next step to then hopefully go and play regularly in the Championship. In terms of incomings, if Coburn goes, that probably leaves Latte Lath as the only natural recognised striker, really.
They need another striker, don't they? They need another striker.
And number 10, you nailed it there. Carrick's talked again and again, hasn't he, about, we won't necessarily be looking for a like-for-like replacement for Akpom. And yet, still not convinced Matt Crooks looks overly comfortable as the number 10. So that's an area Boro are looking to strengthen. And then in midfield, Alex Mowat was by no means the most important player in the Boro squad last season, but he was useful, and we saw that at the end of the season when Johnny Howson was out. And Boro still look probably one light in that department. So that's an area. Those three areas are the positions Boro would like to strengthen before Friday's deadline. Liverpool defender Nat Phillips was linked on Tuesday, kind of random out the blue link, really. But that's an example of what we were talking about, where I don't know whether there's genuine interest there.
Just like, where did that come from?
Such is life in the final days and hours of the transfer window. But
we just need our yellow ties, Dom.
Ah, God, yeah. My tie is to the left of me here, but I'm not going to start ruffling about now. It felt to me at the start of this week, where obviously after the disappointment of West Brom, you looked at the week ahead. You've got a cup game, then the final 3 days of the transfer window, then the QPR league game. What has the look on paper of a winnable league game going into the international break. And it felt then that if Boro win in the cup, then manage to bring in a couple of signings, 2 or 3 signings, and then beat QPR, suddenly everything changes just like that, doesn't it? And you go into the break with a spring in your step.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the joys and the pains of football, isn't it? This sport that we love and we talk so passionately about, and people pay their hard-earned money to follow their team up and down the country, because in the blink of an eye, in 1 week, it can go from catastrophe to celebration. It can also go the other way, as we know all too well. But certainly, I think how Middlesbrough navigate these last few days of the window will, I think, dictate how a lot of fans feel going into that game against Queen's Park Rangers, despite the results last night against Bolton. If they have a really strong end to the window, they tick off those boxes, and I completely agree with what you were saying, Dom. Those, in terms of those positions and areas where Boro need to strengthen. Up front, absolutely, they need another body in there. The 10 role and midfield potentially to just give a little bit of extra cover. But if they have a strong end to that window, everybody goes into the QPR game with that added momentum and optimism. You hope, and you, again, right in what you're saying, the QPR game is a winnable game. If Boro want to be pushing for the playoffs and promotion this season, it certainly should be a winnable game on paper. And it all looks rosy in the garden. If only football worked like that. If only it was as simple as that. Let's hope it is. Because, it hasn't been the start of the season that everybody would have hoped for, including, I'm sure, that Michael Carrick, he said as much. So let's hope a busy few days in the window, a solid performance against Queen's Park Rangers, 3 points in the back pocket, and you drift off into the international break, wishing the international break away, don't you? And waiting for the restart of it all again.
We had, as I mentioned at the top, we had your colleague Mark Drury on last week, and we were chatting about ahead of the West Brom game. We were talking about how Carlos Corberán and Michael Carrick are the direct opposite in the dugouts.
Yes,
one's a jack in the box, the other is largely unmoved by what he sees, or certainly that's what we see. You know, clearly what will be happening inside is very different. You've done plenty of touchline reporting for Tees, obviously. What's that like? What do you see? What do you see? What do you hear that us in the press box or fans in the stands don't get to see or hear?
Everything. Yeah, quite literally everything. I mean, it's great. Honestly, I love doing touchline. It was brilliant. We don't do it as much now, but it's such a different perspective of the game. You get a whole different idea of the game, in the sense of, well, first of all, the view is very different. So it takes a little while to get used to that, but more so the conversations on the pitch. I mean, you hear them loud and clear. You know, if thinking promotion season, if Adam Clayton is going through, or Grant Ledbetter and Adam Clayton are having a back and forth, you can hear it, and it's a unique position. It's a very privileged position to be in that sense as well, because you are getting an insight that so very few over the years have managed to do so. Gary Phillipson used to do it for Century way back when Ali and Bernie were doing the commentary for Century. Mark did it when Ali was commentator for us here at Tees, and then it was me. And yeah, it's, in terms of like the nuts and bolts of it, it's a very different thing to do from commentary. So commentary or presenting a show, you're filling the space, aren't you? You're filling this needs to be an hour, or you're commentating on this first half, which is 45 minutes, and you are there for that 45 minutes to describe and paint the pictures for people at home. On the touchline, it's very much say what you need to say and shut up and leave it to the main part of it to the commentator. So it's very restricted in the sense that it goes against your entire nature as a broadcaster, which is to talk. You have to be very, very direct and sharp with your points to try and just bring that level of insight. But also, it's keeping your head on a swivel. There's always something going on. So if the passage of play is over here, but there might be something really interesting going on off the ball, a conversation between the two centre-backs over here that you're trying to pay attention to. While that's happening, to your left, there might be a substitution that's getting ready. So you're trying to keep a note on that as well. And it's very frantic and very busy. But it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best seat in the house for all sorts of reasons, of just getting that insight of different managers, how they operate, how they interact with their players when it's going well, how they interact with their players when it's not going well. Do they hide? I use hide as for want of a better phrase, but do they, if it's going bad, do they sit on the bench and keep a low profile for the first 10 minutes after conceding? Are they out? They'll take the stick if it's coming to them. They'll be out on the edge of the technical area unmoved. There's loads of little different aspects to it, and you learn to read body language very, very well, and lip read very well also.
Do you find then that, because I'd imagine that you almost wouldn't be watching the game, but you'd be watching everything that surrounds the game, like you say, the dugouts, the players, the little battles and conversations that are going on, rather than taking the game in as a whole, or do you just learn with time and experience to take it all in as one?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. So I think the overriding thing is that my job as a touchline reporter isn't to tell you who is on the ball right now. That's Mark's job, or Ali's job, as was. My job is to tell you the little bits, like you say, when you're in the stands, you don't hear or you don't see, or if you're there in the stands and you're watching it, like you say, you might be following the play. You might not realize that so and so's centre back's just absolutely gone nose to nose with their centre forward, and they're having a bit of a push and shoving match. And in fact, that's been going on for the last 5 minutes because they've been talking to each other the entire game, and there's a bit of needle there. That's your job as the touchline reporter, is to bring that something else away from the directness of who is on the ball right now. It's more about just filling in the edges of that, and telling the story of the dugout, and telling the story of, okay, Middlesbrough have just conceded. Well, how have the players reacted to that? So you're constantly scanning the pitch to try and pick up on any little nuances, like I say, body language or anything like that that can, again, paint that picture for people at home, because that's what we're there to do, right? With radio is make people who aren't there feel like they're there, and take them into the real minute detail of it all, so that they feel they're across it all. It's not just that was a great ball or that was a great shot. It's, yeah, well, that's happening now, but there's also this undercurrent of the two managers having a go at each other on the touchline, or the temperature from the stand is raising and people are getting frustrated with whatever they're seeing. There's so much to it, but like I say, yeah, it's you do learn after a while. I think I did it all in all and still do it occasionally. It's about like 5 or 6 seasons now. You do learn in that time to take it all in as one, and when you can switch your attention to other things, and when you need to stay focused on the ball, and when the goal goes in and everyone's going berserk and you are searching and looking for little things. So yeah, it's more frantic than I thought it was when I first started doing the job. I mean, when sadly, obviously, Ali passed, and Mark became the Middlesbrough commentator, and I went in to do touchline, and having never done it before, it's unlike anything else you would do in broadcasting, like I say, because it is so short and sharp, and you have to have this sort of 360 vision all the time. It took a while to really get into the groove of it a little bit and figure out how you make something of this and make it your own, but it's brilliant, and we're in a very privileged position to be able to provide that for people, I think.
I could ask you loads about that, but I'm conscious I don't want to keep you all day, obviously. But just a couple,
it's all right.
A couple of questions. Who's been more so, I guess, opposing managers, but Boro managers as well? Who's been box office down there on in the technical areas? And the second question on the back of that, I don't know whether you saw Pep Guardiola when Man City beat Newcastle last week, and a fan was clearly telling him what to do, and Pep started giving a bit back in good jest. You could tell it was. How I guess you'll be able to hear everything that the fans are saying. You touched on it there when if fans are getting frustrated. It's an art, isn't it, for the managers over time to be able to not bite, because we know from experience how fiery some of these characters are. It's almost a surprise, really, that more don't bite back like Pep did, even though his was lighthearted.
Well, before I started doing the touchline reporting stuff, I always questioned just how much managers would actually hear things from the stand. I was like, yeah, well, we can hear it up here because we're in amongst it in the stand or in the press box. But them down there, can they really hear it? And yes, they can. They absolutely can. I remember, I think it was Aitor Karanka in his days when there was the chance of attack, attack, attack. If you remember that. And I remember Mark coming down to me and saying, "Oh, Rob, what's it? Something like temperatures are starting to flare a little bit here. Let's go down to the touchline. Rob, what's it like down there?" And I remember saying, "You can very clearly hear the chants of attack, attack, attack. You can very clearly hear the shouts of discontent from the stands." And I said to Mark on that occasion, if I can hear it, he can definitely hear it, because I am maybe 5 yards, 10 yards away from that technical area or where the manager is standing at any given time. And it's I'm with you. I'm surprised that there haven't been more occasions where managers have turned around and, a gesture or a look, or like Pep Guardiola, a little bit tongue in cheek. In terms of those who have been a bit more box office, Jose Mourinho, of course, was just bizarre but brilliant. The only manager I've seen turn up to the Riverside with his own personal security, who stood outside of the dressing room while he was giving his team talks and whatnot. It was very, very strange. Obviously, from a Boro perspective, Tony Pulis was just, I said earlier about needing 360 vision. With Tony Pulis, it was simplified because you just watch Tony Pulis, because he lived and breathed every single ball, didn't he? And some of that is for the cameras and for show, and some of it is to try and, get the fans with him as well, and sort of try and build a bit of momentum and that us against the world type feeling. If things are going your way and decisions are going your way, and you get the old, and he's off and he's water bottles down or whatever. He was always really fun to watch. Aitor Karanka was just Karanka was interesting in the sense that he always had, no matter what happened, this very steely, cold look on his face, whether they're winning or losing. But the second Middlesbrough scored a goal, it was like all of that just evaporated from him, and it was like he was a player again. And he'd always run to his bench and he'd embrace his coaching staff. And Jonathan Woodgate was an interesting one to watch as well, because you could physically see just how much it meant to him for Middlesbrough to win a game, and to do well. You could see what that meant to him as a local lad. So yeah, there's been a fair few down the road who have been both the wild and the wonderful. Dom is a way to perhaps put it, but yeah, it's certainly never dull down there. That's for sure.
There's the name of our episode, the wild with Rob Law of BBCTs. Thanks so much, Rob, for joining us.
No problem.
Great to have you on. We'll do it again in the future, hopefully, because I'm sure there's loads more we can ask you and pick your brains about being down there pitch side and what you see around the tunnel. Let's see how the last few days play out for Boro. Obviously, the deadline's Friday night. We'll have all the coverage on the Echo. We'll have a live blog running throughout the day on Friday as well, up to the deadline, and then obviously we'll have coverage of the QPR game on Saturday. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already on YouTube. Leave a comment if there's anything you want us to discuss. Scott's back next week, so I'd imagine we've got a fair bit to catch up on. And if you're listening on podcast, then obviously rate, review as well, and pass on to your mates, family. So hopefully we can get more eyes and ears on future episodes. Thanks very much again, Rob. Catch up soon.
No problem, mate. Good to see you.
Take care.
Cheers, pal. All the best.